Hi, I'm Paul Yeager. This is the MTOM Show podcast, a production of Iowa PBS and the Market to Market TV show. Again, I want to say thank you to those that contributed at our recent pledge drive. We do say thank you, and your gift allows us to continue to do work like podcasts like these and programming. We used to say dollars equal programs. It means much more than that now. It means an opportunity for me to talk with someone in, say, Alexandria, Minnesota, which is what we did today with Kristi Van Ahn-Kjeseth. She's a market analyst, commodity broker, the one that, like a market analyst that you'd see on our TV show. That is what we do, is discuss the commodity markets with a new voice and see what Kristi has to say from her spot, which is between, say, the Twin Cities and Fargo, almost halfway in between. Generations that have been involved in her family business. It's maybe not the farm, but it's everyone who works on the farm trying to make money and market a crop. So we find out, what does she think in the next 3 to 6 months, and what are some of the biggest issues facing those commodity markets? That is what we discuss, and her as well, in this installment of the MTOM Show podcast. I always like to ask anybody who studies commodities, works with them, what's your alarm set for?
My alarm is set for 5:45.
Oh, sleeping in to 5:45?
Yes, 5:45.
Is that because you just went to bed at like 4?
Mostly it's because I wake up throughout the night and roll over and check the markets and then roll back over. And so it's a bad habit that I probably need to break to a degree. But it is kind of just one of those things I got used to throughout checking the markets throughout the night and seeing kind of the movement. And sometimes you catch those big movements in the middle of the night. So
that is always, and everybody's different. It might be I get up at 3:30 and I write, and what prompted you to get into this and not sleep a full 6 or 8 hours at one time?
Yeah, so it's in my family. So my grandpa started the business, and then my dad took it over, and now I run it with my brother-in-law, Jim. And so, growing up, I never thought I would do that. I was interested in finance side of things. And, the older I got and approached it, I really fell in love with the relationship side of things and ag business. And it's just so unique, and it's really a great opportunity to do something different. And so that's kind of how I stepped into it. And I always remember back in the day, my dad would be constantly talking about it, and it'd be hard to understand exactly what he was talking about. And now I feel like when I talk to somebody not involved in agriculture, it's that same kind of blind, their face kind of goes blank and they're like, excuse me, what do you do? What do you talk about? So it's something I've been dealing with for my entire life, and I love doing it. I've been doing it since 2009. I got an ag business degree from North Dakota State University, and I never looked back.
All right, we'll get more in your background in a minute. You just said something really funny there. What is the phrase that gets the biggest, strangest reaction when you said that some people look at you kind of funny?
Yeah, usually when they ask what I do for a job, and I'll just kind of say that I work with farmers and I help them price their grain and livestock, and they look at me and they say, "What do you mean you price their grain and livestock?" And you get to this big, deep conversation about how you advise them and how you talk to them and build those relationships, and then they want to know exactly how you do it, whether it's cash, and then you get into the cash side of things, and that gets confusing for them, and you try and switch over to talk about futures and options. That's just as confusing to them. But it's a fun conversation. And I think that's the biggest thing, is being able to talk about the relationship side of business and how you can really feel like you're part of making something better and strategically planning for something.
You mentioned helping folks and talking about cash and futures. Is there one that you like working with over the other, cash or futures?
Yeah, I mean, cash is king, right? That's the best thing about, these markets have gotten a pullback, but overall you're still at profitable levels. And so it's fun getting those really great cash side. And I think also the unique ability to educate producers on, it's not just cash, separating futures, separating basis. And those are tools that I think are such a baby step for them to be able to learn into and really they can make a huge difference in their operations just by focusing on that. So obviously futures and options are very fun to trade. I like to kind of play around with positions to kind of find that best fit, time frame, cost wise. But I think that really just focusing on futures and basis can make the biggest upgrade for a producer.
You said your dad was in this business?
Yeah, so
Where
my
was that
grandpa
at?
started it
Or grandpa
in
started it, sorry.
1987, and then my dad took it over, and he retired, and now I run it with my brother-in-law, Jim. So it's always a family business. We get a lot of questions, you know, is it hard running a family business? And honestly, we work very, very well together. My dad has been retired for quite some time, but he still follows the markets. And honestly, we always get text messages and emails from him and kind of saying, hey, did you see this? Did you check out this? And I think it's his way to be retired yet not bored. And now he gets to be involved with all the fun decisions without the consequences, so to say.
Is this all in Alexandria?
Yep. So we're all in Alexandria, and there's 7 brokers besides, including Jim and myself. And we all work together as one team. And it's actually really fun. It's a fun dynamic because a couple of the guys that work with us actually farm on the side as well. And I think that's the biggest thing is you can separate the emotion, but you still have to account for the emotion, right? And so it's nice to have that where we can say, hey, we need to be looking at these sales right now. We need to be approaching this, but knowing that maybe it's a time frame like last spring that was hard to get in the ground, or those ones that farmers are really reluctant. It's nice to have a couple guys that work with us that are also feeling that pain and questioning their decisions as well, to be able to kind of get a gauge on where you are as far as the emotional side of things.
Did you ever think that instead of cash and futures and options and positions, you wanted to actually be in the field and get your hands dirty that way? Did you ever think about being a farmer?
No, finance has always been my thing. I love math. I love numbers. And in fact, a couple years ago, I really got to see the agronomy side of things. And it was so fascinating to see that. So I think if you looked back at who I was as a high schooler, I would have said no way. But now actually seeing it, seeing the agronomy side of things, seeing all the cool technology and really the care that you put into growing a crop, that's really fascinating to me now. But numbers, math, accounting, finance, that has always been my thing.
Do you have one of those photographic memories that you see a number and you can remember a position in 2009 when you started, or 2012 or 2018? You're like, well, remember in December of 18, we hit this, and you didn't even have to look up in a notebook?
It doesn't come to me quite that, but I'm very good at pegging situations with what was currently going on around the market. I'll never forget. I have 3 young girls, and my first pregnancy was 2012, which was the hottest summer on record. And I was due at the very end of summer. We got that big rally due to the drought conditions. And I'll never forget being ready to be done. And it was 4th of July, and it was 100 degrees here in Minnesota, which doesn't happen a ton. And I was like, this heat is never going to end. And it was constant heat the rest of that way. So it's situations like that I'll peg it back to things. But overall, yeah, it's just crunching numbers, figuring that stuff out, and really just looking at a bigger picture side of things. I've always loved to kind of play around with things and make something fit into the best kind of personal preference.
When you see a USDA report and you see that, well, they took 2 billion here and moved a million there and 6 over there, you can instantly compute the other end and know what that and really means, and you can translate it.
Yeah, as long as you take the emotion out and be like, why would they do something like that? But you sometimes have those questions. I think you see the fluctuations of it. You look back, and I'll never forget the January report when USDA chose to come in here and decrease bean exports. And I kind of was caught off guard by that. So you kind of look around those numbers, and you can kind of see how they play with numbers. That's what's happening right now when you look at demand. I feel like they're like doing the tango between exports and crush right now to try and keep us above 200 million bushel carryout. But it is that fascinating number to kind of see how everything computes. And looking at today, just looking at where we are for spring crop insurance price and looking at years past, where we've been able to get to post that. I think there's a lot of some panic around right now that these markets are kind of dwindling off and settling in here. And coming back to that data, I love coming back to that as a reassurance point. Obviously, it's never the same, but it does give you that little bit of effort.
You mentioned emotion. There's a lot of producers that will tell me that, well, I handle it all, or there's some that say, no, I hand it off to someone who just looks at numbers and takes the emotion out of it. Where does emotion play for you in analyzing markets and being able to advise clients the best?
Yeah, so emotion is this huge, huge play in this market, not only for producers, but also people in my field, right? And so I think one of the best things that happens for us as far as making decisions is when we're making decisions and you're unsure about your crop, how it's handling it. I don't have to drive by your crop, right? You might send me pictures, I might see it on social media, but I don't have to constantly be driving by it. I don't have to be making those decisions about is it worth it to put the additional fertilizer down or not. And so just removing that side of things makes such a big difference. And I'll never forget also, you were told to look at a chart and not know what that chart is. And that's just that way to take that emotional side of it because, I might have this deep down bias towards corn doing a specific direction. But if I don't know that I'm looking at a corn chart and I'm just analyzing it how it is, that makes such a big difference to kind of take those emotions out of it. So I think it is easier. Emotion does get the best of all of us. I think that's just one thing we're so used to. And honestly, sometimes that emotion is one of the best things you can have too. It's not always bad. It's just you have to make sure with your emotions you have check and balance.
Well, how do you consult a client to have checks and balances and take out some emotion? I mean, you're kind of saying
Yeah.
that maybe I should have some, but how do you tell me to take it out?
Yeah. So, for example, I had a conversation today with a producer that wants to be long beans, and I can understand that concept that we're well off of where we were a couple of weeks ago. We're well below crop insurance pricing. You look at kind of the profitability levels that we were at March 1st for maybe planting some acreage numbers. I can understand that, but you need to also say, hey, we need to draw that line in the sand saying that if we get below this level, we're not going to be part of this anymore. And we're willing to risk that amount and that amount only. And, kind of that same situation when you look at cash and basis, basis has really picked up around our neck of the woods throughout the Dakotas for corn. And it's really driving through the ethanol sector right now. And so they're not happy with the bottom line as far as cash goes, but the basis is obtainable. And so I think that's one of those things that you can take the emotion out and say, hey, let's sell it. Let's take cash in hand. And if you really, really do believe that this market is going higher, you can look at other strategies behind it. And I think anytime you can take some risk off the table to a degree, but still make both sides happy, me being risk management, them being thinking it's higher, you kind of find that middle ground and you can cope with it either direction.
And it's always easier said than done.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
I mean, and then you can say, well, why did I not see it this way? And why did I, the podcast that released today, as we record this, he had said, well, whenever I sell, the market usually always moves higher right after. So
Yeah.
I can be of service and make money by announcing, I'm selling today, and somebody else can make money. How do you talk someone who says, Kristi, this is what I'm thinking, and you're like, yeah, go for it. They go for it, and what you didn't want to have happen over here happens. How do you talk the client down a little bit?
Yeah, I think communication is key. So that's one of the biggest things that I think most of the time I talk too much to a degree, but I think the biggest thing is taking, that conversation and saying, do we understand the risk? Do we understand if it does this direction, we're not going to be mad at ourselves because we walked through every step along the way. And we know that if we're going to have a move in one direction, it's usually going to end up giving us an opportunity down the road. And I think that's the biggest thing is not to dwell on the past as much. And that's, as a company, when we kind of talk through things and work through things, one of our biggest sayings that we always go through is failing forward, right? Something doesn't work, but it's always going to give you the opportunity to learn from it and move forward and hopefully better yourself. So you're failing forward. And that's the approach that we really harness in on and approach. And, there's been some really difficult days, but everything gives you a learning opportunity. I think as long as communication is key, I think everyone's going to understand at the end of the day.
Talking too much, that's my job.
Yeah, I talk so much.
When you look at a market, we'll just say with corn, for instance.
Yep.
Are you always a technical person? When you mentioned charts and positions, are you strictly a fundamental person? Or where is your balance and how does it change as the year goes on?
Yeah, so we actually kind of look at four things, fundamentals, technicals, seasonals, and then where you see investment flow, which is a little difficult right now because we're a little backlegged on CFTC. But we look at all four of those, and I think each one of us has their key that they love. So I love fundamentals, and I think fundamentally that's just tied to my love of numbers. I love hard facts that I can say, hey, hold on, we're at this carry out, so this carry out should mean this. And I like having that kind of strict nature to it. But 6 years ago, fundamentals meant a whole lot more than they do now. And you need to adapt and you need to learn with it. And technicals have the ability to take over a market for a very long period of time. And so I'm slowly getting a little bit more into technicals, but I definitely have guys in the office that focus a lot heavier on them, looking at positive and negative divergence, looking at, your extensions. And I also think that it's so great to have people on the right seat of the bus, right? So if that's what they're focusing on and that's what they love, utilize that and build off of that with another pillar that you can make it stronger. And I would say I love fundamentals the most, but they really all have their chance to shine and matter the most for the markets.
Let's go back to 1987 when the company started. How
Yeah.
different is the industry? Because there's plenty of farmers who were farming in 1987 who might say, well, that's ridiculous what you're saying. I've always abided by this and it's worked well for me.
Yeah. So that's a conversation I get to have very frequently with my dad.
That's what I was leading to. I was like, what do you and your dad talk about?
Yeah. So that's the conversation I get to have a lot with my dad because my dad is hardcore fundamentals, and that's that was the era that he grew up in, and that was all that mattered back then. And the markets didn't move enough to make a difference to say technicals had a place to play. You didn't have algorithms, you didn't have outside influences as much. And so it's kind of a fun back and forth. Sometimes we do get a little bit heated and say, my dad is very much on that fundamental side, and he can be like, no, I know he grew up in Iowa. He knows a lot of people that farm still, and he'll see their pictures of their crops, and he'll drive down and he'll get bored. So he'll go on a mini crop tour where he just drives around because, what else does he have to do when he's retired? And he'll just talk about, oh, the crop looks fantastic or the crop looks disastrous. And that will swing his mood in one direction or other, his feeling, and that will kind of influence him to say, you should be looking maybe at some more protection, or you should be lifting some of your protection. And we can come in here and kind of marry the two of them and say, it's not the same as it used to be. It just doesn't always matter about conditions.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask about your clients for a moment, just in the sense of, are they within 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours of you?
My parents?
No, your clients.
Oh, yeah. So I would say majority of my clients are from southern Minnesota throughout the Dakotas. So A lot of them are heavily into the Dakotas, specifically North Dakota. North Dakota is like a very unique, I feel like North Dakota has the chance to really be such a key feature in agriculture. And I think it's made such a big impact already with the sheer amount of acreage that it's grown. But really, when you look at like renewable diesel, the plants that are going up, the one that should be online here in this fall, that plant that's going up right now in Spiritwood, North Dakota, if it runs at full capacity, it will chew through a quarter of all beans grown in North Dakota. And so it's really fun to be kind of on that forefront of seeing some really fun, exciting future of agriculture. And North Dakota has really stepped up to the plate. So it's fun to see that. We don't matter as much, right? But it is fun to see.
But that's where I'm going, I guess, Kristi, is, okay, so you have a client in Bismarck, for example.
Yep.
And you have somebody in southern Minnesota. We'll just, for the sake of argument, say Rochester. We're 12 hours apart from each other. Their differences are different. Their needs are different. Their weather patterns can be completely different. How do you help the producer in, say, Rochester, Olmsted County, understand what's going on in Bismarck and how the two are both related and apart, and how your position here needs to be a little different than the position down there? Because that's a pretty wide gap, and a lot of things can be very, very different.
Yeah, and just your ability to grow a crop is a lot different between those two areas. So a few years ago, North Dakota like completely dried up. It was absolutely disastrous to look around and see the crop and see a lot of their corn didn't even have cobs on them. It was absolutely heartbreaking. And it was so hard for them, to talk through them and see, what kind of their crop was going through, what disasters were out there, but you weren't seeing it necessarily reflected into the market, right? You still had some suppressed prices, and it was hard to tug them away from each other when they want to be as bullish can be, but that some of the key areas are having good growing conditions. And so you have to remember that it's still based off a whole, right? The whole US growing regions, but you need to tailor it to a degree. And that's, I mean, not to beat a drum, but focusing on the basis side of things is one of them. But they are completely different, even though you're involved in them. But most of the time it's those struggles of saying, man, everyone has a good growing area and mine's bad. Or sometimes you're on the lucky side of it, right? You got all the gravy bushels and you had a disaster somewhere else and it's reflecting. And so that's a little bit better to deal with those times, but it definitely does have to relate to itself.
Oh, I think a lot of producers get stuck in backyarditis. I mean, oh, in my county, it looks like this. That means the whole area. It's super dry here, and we're in a key producing county. Therefore, the rest of the market must be down. How come it's not responding? I can't tell you how many times we get that question during a growing season for the
Yep.
program is, it's super dry where I'm at. Again, it goes back to you have to think of the larger picture. All right. As we record this here, Kristi, we have a couple of weeks between when we are talking to when
Okay.
this will hit the air. So I want you to know that in the last few minutes. Help me out through this planting season to mid-growing season. Let's just start with wheat. What do you see as a couple of big factors influencing the wheat market for the next 3 to 6 months?
Yeah, when I look at wheat, we got quite the surprise in January of a lot of winter wheat acres planted, more than we were really expecting. And I think the biggest question moving forward is, are those winter wheat acres going to actually stick? We know that we've had really poor growing conditions. We're going to have much better insight once we start getting those weekly updates from USDA on crop conditions. But that's going to be the biggest thing for me to watch is, what do we see with winter wheat? Does it stick around with the high acre numbers? Because what acre number we got from winter wheat really is going to pull some numbers from the other ones. You initially were thinking big corn acres, and once you saw that, kind of question it. Also, when you look at spring wheat, I know it's not the biggest market, but it doesn't pencil. And we know that it needs to stick in a rotation to a degree, but it really does not pencil. And you're looking at the Dakotas through west central Minnesota with a lot of snow cover on the ground, cooler temperatures. And when it comes to planting, corn is king. Corn is very profitable. And I think you're going to see producers start to try and get corn in as fast as they can, beans, and then probably go to wheat and say, hey, what I get in is what I get in. And so I think the fundamentals behind wheat want to be extremely friendly. You look at kind of the world dynamic, you look at the carryout levels that we're at right now, but it just cannot seem to get up and going. And so I do think that wheat's going to have its market to shine. We see managed money is extremely short wheat complex, especially Chicago wheat. I think it's going to, but it's kind of like that ticking time bomb, right? When are you going to get something to get it moving? And I do think once you see that, it will be able to really find its ground. And usually wheat can be a leader of the pack when the markets want to go. That's what I'm hoping to
Mm-hmm.
see. But I think that first has to come with a change in winter wheat acres, the talk of kind of coming in and switching some of those acres, or poor planting for North Dakota and west central Minnesota.
Is 2023 going to be good for corn?
I'm actually okay friendly on corn right now, but I have serious concerns that if we get this crop in, you have the potential for a very, very large crop. And so it's wet, it's cool in a lot of areas. We're a ways off from really making it a huge deal as far as planting goes. But if that corn gets in, you have the potential for some very, very large numbers. And until recently, our demand has been really poor for corn. And we finally saw China start to step in and look at corn and buying corn more aggressively from the US, but it was a dry spell for a while on the demand side of things. So we do need to see that stick around. I think that you're going to have a lot of great opportunities for corn, but I get nervous if we can get this crop in the ground in a timely fashion, what that would mean for last half June into the rest of the summer.
You mentioned you had a client that wanted to go long on beans. I kind of get the sense you were trying to talk that person out. So, not feeling the love for soybeans here in the
Oh
next
no,
3 to 6 months?
yeah, no, I actually really like beans. I'm a person that needs to have risk tolerance in there, right? And so I'm actually friendly beans. I don't think that you probably got the acre number you needed to get. You had a relationship just that strongly favored corn in so many aspects. And we see the writing on the wall for what could come for demand structure from soybeans. So you look back to trade war era where we got ourselves in, we really had all our eggs in one basket. And I think we've done such a great job at diversifying our demand structure. And as long as we can keep that crush margin and you see kind of the renewable diesel ideas on the wall, I think that your demand structure could be very, very friendly for soybeans. And I'm just not sure that you're going to see the acres planted that need to. Now that all depends on spring weather, right? But if I had to pick between the two of them, I'm more friendly beans than I am corn.
Okay, you know how we say all basis is local. It's like politics. When you're
Yeah,
mentioning the new biodiesel plant going on online, those in that area are pretty excited. But then there might be somebody in an I state who's going, "Yeah, but China's not buying, or Brazil is the big seller." And what do I do? Again,
right.
what do I do?
Yeah, so basis is strongest for beans up until the January February timeframe, and then really it's dictative of crush, and we've seen crush kind of back off to a degree, and that's been one of the hurtful things is that right when you caught a lot of people bullish on this upswing of beans, you started to see this basis level deteriorate, and we saw China kind of step away. We know that Brazil is going to have a good crop. We've recently seen them start to have estimates that increase their production numbers. And so you get a little bit nervous on that side of things, but we know that China has that appetite for beans, that you're going to need those multiple growing. I think the biggest detriment to beans would be what happens if you start to see China and Russia start to get more involved with each other, and then in Ukraine. I think that's the biggest thing that no one can plan for. And
Right.
that's something that you need to have you in the back of your mind, but it's not something I think you need to really focus on quite yet. So to me, I think the crush is strong enough. I think the bean demand is strong enough. And I think it's going to be there, but it's a big wild card when you look at it.
Livestock wise, is there one that sticks out to you as that you want to cover first here? You want to go live cattle? You want to go feeders?
Either one works for me.
All right. What do you think live cattle? We have this continued run on high prices at the grocery store. The consumer doesn't seem to be backing away the fork from eating the beef. But at what point does it get to be too much in the
Yeah,
price?
so I think that is a big question that you have to ask is when you step away and when you look at kind of where money supply is for the US, we still have plenty of money supply on. So you want to talk those inflation numbers and you get a little bit nervous that you could see buyers step away. I think that you still have a lot of money to spend as a producer post COVID. You're obviously going to start pinching the lower class and middle class when you talk about inflation, but we seem to be looking at this situation where we continue to raise interest rates and we're kind of getting the job done, but it's not changing anything. And so I think moving forward, that's going to be the biggest question is at what point does it break the cycle? When do you start to have those really big talks of recession or talk about that you could see a hard landing? And we briefly had that when we started talking about banks closing, and we kind of shifted away from it. And I think this policy that we have moving forward with interest rates is going to be so important. But we also remember taking it back, we just don't have the inventory that we had before. And so you still have that tug on it. Cash continues to be strong. And so I think the biggest concern when you look at it is the economic side of things. And pretty soon you're going to be coming in, and before we know it, talking about a new presidential election. And when you start to get next to that next cycle, it seems like things quiet down for a while. So we don't have anything wild on both sides. And you get to that period where not a lot changes. You don't make a bunch of bold moves. And we could find ourselves in that groove where you're trying to change a little bit, but overall you have kind of that quiet year on the economy side of things.
So it sounds like you think live cattle reflects a little more of the overall economy than maybe some of the other
Yeah.
commodities.
And I
Okay.
think you can look at it and overall, your cash is friendly. You've slid off of these. I think the most nervous thing to look at when you look at cattle markets, live and feeder cattle, is seeing what hogs have done recently. And I think that should be a fear in producers that they can remain friendly. They can be optimistic for prices, but to know that sometimes you can see something completely out of your control wipe out and really hurt yourself. So we have been slowly inching towards being more aggressive on marketing, but making sure that our top side is not limited.
How can you expand in a feedlot right now if you think, oh, I have some feeders. I think I need to put a couple extra in and help this restock. Is that a good idea right now?
You look at it, and I think you look at the profitability right now, and I think it's there. The biggest question I have is so many producers right now, it's a lot of work, and they're looking at the next generation that doesn't really necessarily want to be as active as a role in it. And I think that's where you get a little bit problematic, is that at some point you're going to see guys start to get a little tired. And I think that's the biggest question, is can we keep this expansion? Can we try to expand it when we don't have as active as the next generation involved? And I think that might be the scariest thing moving forward, to look at it on that perspective.
And that is, yeah, that's a big story I've had with those in Oklahoma and Kansas and Texas, where feedlots are fewer and farther between with the smaller independent producer. You mentioned hog a little bit. There, do you see the U.S. hog market still hanging a lot on foreign interests, mostly China?
Yeah, I think that is a big play. I mean, you've started to talk about China having an uptick on African swine fever once again. And I think right now, maybe the focus is that that brings more demand for our feed use, right? And coming in here, and maybe that's why they were aggressive here, buying as much corn in that short of amount of time. When you look at the hog markets and you look at kind of the detriment that you have to those future prices, I mean, that kind of swing can really take out, a small farm. And I think that's the biggest concern, is where do we see this bleeding stop? And where do we see the turnaround that we can start getting it? Because if you continue to break this and you get to those lows like we saw, you're going to have a lot of people not be as active and not see them come in and bring more in.
Your three daughters, do you think any of them have, they look at mom and go, yeah, that looks fun? Are they helping you yet?
They're young, so mostly they like to come in here and steal all the candy.
Ah,
So that's where they're at this point. I don't know. I think I have this conversation with my brother-in-law that I run the business with, and I don't ever want to force something on my children. I hope that they find that passion. I think my dad did a fairly good job at doing that, because I bucked him extremely hard. My dad sat back, and my dad waited for that perfect opportunity. I fought him on it. And, I said I wanted to be in big finance, and I can be a very stubborn individual. And all my siblings went to NDSU, and I said I wasn't going to go there. And and so I fought it, and I found myself at the University of Minnesota in Twin Cities. And I am just not a big cities person. And my dad waited for that perfect opportunity to say, you know what, you could just transfer to NDSU, get that ag business degree, and come work with me. And I hope that eventually I do have a child that's interested in it and sees the passion in it. And I hope they see the relationship side of it. I think that's what I love, the conversations. I love being able to help a producer. I love celebrating the highs and really working through the lows. And I hope eventually one of those does. But they have quite the personality that might not be right for them either.
genetics is fun that way, isn't it?
Right. It is. Yeah. I think everyone that knows me well and knows my youngest daughter knows that payback is definitely what I'm getting from my younger years. But hopefully that just gives her the drive to be, that strong, confident leader. Otherwise, I'm going to have a lot of gray hair eventually.
Well, that maybe you'll be back to that beginning, what we talked about, less sleep, because you're like, oh
Yeah.
goodness, what's she up to now?
Right.
Well, Fargo's fun, always a good place. NDSU, great institution. Minnesota's not bad either. It's just always kind of fun to hear the rivalries, and I think it's worked out okay for you, Kristi.
Yeah, I love NDSU. I should have gone there from the get-go. I appreciated my years at the University of Minnesota. I was just back there for state basketball. Our team made it for Alexandria. And so it was definitely interesting to be back there, but it is fun. It's fun to be in that rivalry. And we came down when NDSU played Iowa for football, and that was a blast. It's fun to be involved in those kind of things.
Yeah, NDSU football puts the shutter in you and I, Iowa and Iowa State fans here easily. They don't like to see the Bison rolling down.
Yeah, it's been fun. That's a fun dynamic that, in Minnesota, you don't have that rivalry as much. Where you go down to Iowa and it's so heated between Iowa and Iowa State. It's always so fun to see my grandma and my dad bicker back and forth. And it's just so great to be. I think it's fun, and it adds something to talk about in that element when things aren't great. At least you have that to talk about.
When you have to agree to disagree on the direction of corn, let's discuss something less political. Football.
Right.
Yeah, and battles. All right, Kristi, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
My thanks to Kristi, and thanks to you for watching or listening or reading. You can do all three, by the way. If you have any feedback for me, hit me up at market2market@iowapbs.org. We'll see you next time. Thank you.